Hello and welcome to the What is Tabletop podcast, where we're having a possible bonus episode. Let's see how long we talk for.
Sounds good.
My name's Frank. I've been GMing for over 10 years, and Charles is.
I've been here all along.
And today we're hopping on the bandwagon that our friends over at Tales from Elsewhere and Odin's Key Gaming have decided to do. What is that exactly, Charles? Can you explain it?
They are looking for creating barbarian classes in other games.
So basically, they just want to know, how would you make a barbarian in your own, custom TTRPG?
Yeah.
And as people who talk about those things, we canonically have not made one.
No.
If
If I created a barbarian, I'd call it the Big Mad. The Big Mad.
That's it.
And that's all I've got right now.
Okay, so luckily, in order to stay on topic, I have a few subclasses for 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons that I made, and we're going to kind of talk about how, that's how you step your toe into game design.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is you make create stuff for an already existing property, and you just tweak it enough to where you can get your feet wet, get understanding okay, this is how creating custom things works, and then suddenly you're making your own RPG. And so that's kind of what we're talking about today.
Yeah, it kind of gives you those guidelines, so you're not starting from scratch. You're like, hey, I want to create, maybe you have this idea, I want to create my own TTRPG, but what is it going to be about? So, maybe starting off with homebrewing a couple of things from an already existing property is a great way to start that. So.
Yeah, because it's like you said, it's got the guidelines, it's got just a framework usually, so you have less structurally you have to think about.
Absolutely.
How the heck does this system work in general? And you can just be like, oh, I know how this system works. How can I exploit it in a fun and interesting way? For your viewing pleasure, I am going to talk to you about the Custom Barbarian class I made, and we're going to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of it all.
But before you do that, subscribe, and comment like usual.
Okay, so we're going to talk about my custom stuff. I'm not nervous. You're nervous. I have to put this on the internet and show people how much of a sham I am.
We're all shams on the inside.
Well, I'm a clam on the inside.
It's that pearl of wisdom that you have deep.
Indeed. So, a little bit of context. So I, like every GM, especially when you're playing only Dungeons and Dragons, you inevitably are like, I could make a class or something.
Yeah. And
then I learned I can't make a class. That can't be the first thing I do.
No, I've got to learn the rules and play games.
Well, I think the first thing most people will create, whether they realize it or not, is a custom monster.
Yeah. 100%. Yes.
And usually, let's be honest, it's taking something that already exists, tweaking it a little bit. Here's a red dragon, but instead of fire, he spews words of affirmation that charm you, and you can't attack the dragon. 100%.
Yeah. Well, that's what I did with the Fallout game.
Right.
I remember, I took an idea. They had I don't know if it was in the book or not, but they had in the video games. They had a monster. I was like, well, I want to make some version of it for our setting, because our setting was in Florida. So I created my own version of it. And I think creating monsters is probably the easiest thing, because it's fewer things to remember, because it's just a stat. You're just creating stat blocks at that point. So.
Yeah, and you're tweaking things that already exist.
Yeah, they don't need a background. They don't need a whole lot of attention to it.
But usually the next thing you're going to create is probably some sort of class or subclass.
Yeah,
I recommend starting if you know a system really well and it has a class and then subclass archetypes. Always make one of those first.
Yeah,
right. That's going to be the easiest way to get you used to game design and game development.
Yeah, because it'll allow you to kind of separate. If you're doing a wizard subclass, it will allow you to separate from the other types of wizards. Is what separates my wizard from these other wizards, and ultimately that stuff you could go back and use in your own TTRPG.
It's also good to be able to compare it to the things that already exist. And so you might make something and then realize, oh, there's this other subclass that does exactly what I want, and maybe a little bit better, maybe a little bit worse. I've definitely seen people make their own subclasses, and I'm like, you're just stealing what this other class does.
Yeah.
And it's not as interesting as if you came up with it on your own. I knew a guy who his favorite class was the Warlock, and so he made 33 different subclasses for the Warlock.
Wow.
And I looked through them, and I'm like, well, this is just the Rogue, but a Warlock. This is just a fighter, but a warlock. It just changed.
So it was almost like multi-classing, but keeping it just one class, so you could get all those benefits.
Yeah. Oh, and then there was certain things where it's you get the benefits of this class's signature thing, and I'm like, that's not as interesting design-wise as being able to come up with your own unique spin on.
That's
something.
more just taking bits and pieces from already existing things.
Right.
You're not doing anything original with it. You're just adding things to it from other classes that you're like, oh, it'd be really cool. My warlock could, have really high stealth and it would be really cool, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it's kind of the reason that a lot of people from a design perspective don't like the Hexblade Warlock.
Yeah,
it's because it makes the warlock almost a better version of the fighter, because not only are you able to still be a fighter and do fightery stuff, you're on top of that still casting spells and doing it kind of better than if a fighter could.
Yeah, so it kind of makes you overpowered a little bit.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's stuff you want to look at. And again, what's nice is having this roadmap when it comes to subclasses and stuff like that. You can see okay, at 3rd level, each class gets this thing.
Yeah.
So I need something like that. At 7th level, they all get what's called a ribbon ability, how Mike Merles describes it, which is basically it's an ability that you occasionally use. Yeah. And that's it. And so, again, you don't want to make a subclass where it's the 7th level ability is a little bit of fluff. You get speak with animals, and you get to fly occasionally, and you can cause someone to lose half their health with one swing of your axe, right? See how those aren't necessarily equal.
Yeah.
And that's, most players would probably go towards the one that's overpowered. So you want to keep it balanced amongst the different, subclasses that already exist, while at the same time making your subclass a little bit more interesting in that regard.
So once you've decided what your subclass is, what's the next step in the design?
Yeah, so basically what you always want to think about is you can go 2 ways with this. We know we're making a subclass. So are we going to base it off of a cool mechanic I have, or are you going to base it off of a cool flavor? Gotcha. That's kind of the 2 design philosophies that I found of TTRPG design.
Yeah.
Do you start with this idea of here's the really cool flavor and we're going to make everything flavorful so the mechanics feed into that? Or here's the really cool mechanic I came up with. How do I then make that flavorful? It's the yin yang approach of that. Which do you really start with is really the more important thing.
So figure out which one to start with, and then you can add context to it, later on once you figure one side of the equation out. Yeah.
So for example, of the many subclasses I've made, I try to make one subclass per class in D&D. Okay. And I did better with some of it than others. I think I ended up coming up with 3 concepts for a monk subclass.
Oh, wow.
But ultimately fleshing it out, not so much. So for example, we have the Guardian archetype. Let me see if you can guess who this is, what this is about. You get an ability called Sentinel Shield, where you can throw your shield at people and deal damage. You want to take any guess?
You know what? Throwing a shield. You'll have to give me more than that.
Yeah, so it's Captain America. But you get additional abilities. So at 7th level, you can toss your shield to add your shield bonus to an ally. You can shove an ally away from if a line attack's happening. You can, and they're next to you. You can shove them so that they're not getting hit with the thing.
All right.
Right. Or you can even switch places with an ally, where you're hey, you're now where I used to be, and I'm taking the damage. So the main point is it's a very tinky version of the fighter, where they're all about controlling the battlefield, so where they take the damage instead of the more squishy people. And then I have additional stuff. And at 18th level, the big thing is that you get a second reaction.
Oh, a second reaction. That's nice.
Yeah. And so the reason I did that is because a lot of the abilities I came up with end up using your reaction a lot. So I'm well, how can we make you be able to use these abilities a lot more often? Second reaction, which, looking back on that, probably would have given you a second reaction a little bit earlier, but that might be too powerful. You can see now where the balancing of it is a little difficult, right?
I throw my shield and cast counterspell.
No, seriously, that's where you got to think about it. And so having it at 18th level, the spellcasters can't multi-class into fighter 18 levels just to get a second reaction. It's not as useful as a 2-level dip. Yeah, so there's classes, the subclasses like that, where it's what if I made Iron Fist but into a monk? What if I made Doctor Strange, who's a sorcerer, even though he's technically a wizard by D&D standards because he learns his spells, but I made him a sorcerer class, and that's called the Glyph Touched.
Glyph Touched, okay.
Yeah, that's its own thing. Stuff like that. But then I came up with a class where the flavor was really the big point. Okay. How do flavor-wise, I make mechanics out of this? And that's called the Cheat Rogue. And it's basically just a guy who throws sand in your eyes, makes you blinded, thus giving him sneak attack or advantage, thus allowing him to have sneak attack. Yeah. And then I was just well, what other things would a cheat rogue do? Well, a thing they would do is just start throwing random stuff, right? A bottle.
So improvised weaponry type thing?
Yeah, improvised weaponry, but you can use that towards your sneak attack.
Oh, okay.
Right? You can do my favorite ability is called Look Over There, Right, because I just love the idea of
I
like,
love
look over
it.
there, what's
Just-
happening over there, and
love
then
it.
you just escape.
Distraction.
Right,
Yeah.
but canonically, again, because the flavor is more important in this class than anything other, is you get advantage on stealth checks, you and all allies. But a minute after you use this ability, everyone starts realizing they've been duped and looking for you specifically.
That's funny.
Yeah. Right. Very in character where they're like, I didn't see anything. Do you see anything? No, I don't. Where did they go?
That's beautiful.
And then I have like a few other ones, including the Barbarian one we're going to go into a little deeper dive with, where like the College of Tactics. That was a friend of mine who had a 4th edition character that was a warlord, which is very like battlefield controlled character.
Yeah.
Don't have that in 5th edition. So I had to come up with my closest version of that possible. And so like that one was very much a concept from a mechanics perspective first, then building out the flavor from there.
Did you take most of it from the previous edition to model it, or did you model it after current edition?
Yeah, like one of the abilities a warlord usually has is like being able to move people outside of their turn. Okay. And so I had a version of that. This was back before any subclass actually did that.
All right.
I had a version where you can spend your die and move characters that much. And so that was kind of the idea, is keeping that part integral from a mechanical standpoint, whilst being able to translate it to a different edition.
All right.
But then there's the Barbarian Path of the Mechanist.
Path of the Mechanist.
Yes. Okay. And this one was definitely I had a really cool idea first of like the mechanics, and then I was able to craft a very interesting flavor that then informed more of the mechanics, so on and so forth.
So from just hearing the title of it, it almost sounds like an artificer barbarian.
Yeah, what would you like when you hear that? Before I even describe any of it to you, what comes to your mind?
You said mechanist, not machinist. But
yeah, they're the same thing.
Similar? Okay, so to me it sounds like they'd be proficient like in some sort of armor and like almost like a mech. Like they'd have some sort of protection. So
okay, so maybe I need to change the name because that's not at all what it's about.
Oh, okay. Hey, maybe let me know in the comments what you think it might mean.
But basically, this version was what of a barbarian that's slowly replacing their body with metal bits or robotic bits.
No, your name still works.
Yeah, so that's the idea there. And when we get to the part that I really had the idea for, you might be able to figure it out. We'll see, but we're just gonna go through it.
Sounds good.
The first ability you get at 3rd level is being able to choose what part of your body you're replacing. Do you replace your arms? Do you replace your legs? Or do you replace your torso?
So this is replacing and augmenting as well. Like, do you get some sort of buff with that? Okay.
Starting when you choose this path at 3rd level, you're able to replace some part of your body with a newer, better mechanical version. You must pick one part of your body, arms, legs, or torso, and replace it with metal forged into the shape of that body part. This process takes a long rest to complete and is believed that you have been collecting and working on the materials needed to have this new body part ahead of time. That way you don't have that GM who's like, where you need the supplies to do it.
So I'm assuming each of these body parts would give you some sort of enhanced ability, like would do it to your legs so that gave you extra speed, like it makes you move faster.
Exactly.
And then armor for the chest, and then attack for the arms.
Yeah, you're pretty close for sure to my design. So that's good that like it's intuitive.
Yeah,
legs speed is increased by 10. Torso +2 to your AC if you're not wearing any armor, which you're a barbarian, you're already not wearing any armor. But then you have arms. When you rage, your rage damage bonus to damage rolls is doubled. Now that might be too strong.
Yeah, I'm thinking like, man, especially at 3rd level.
Right. Maybe it's a +1 instead. Yeah. I don't know. This is where playtesting becomes very important because the math bits of this stuff is what's necessary.
So that's something to keep in mind too, is that when you're creating these things, you're going to need to playtest them because, again, it may be way overpowered, maybe too weak. You won't know until you play it.
Yeah, my philosophy when it comes to anything, if you're like, I don't know if this could be overpowered, go with the overpowered version. It's almost always easier to scale back than it is to push forward.
Yeah, because I can't tell you how many times like I was like, oh man, like when I try to homebrew something, I'm like, I want this thing to be more powerful, but I've made them way too weak. So what do I do?
So then we have the 6th level ability, which usually is like a ribbon ability for the barbarian, the one that's like doesn't matter too much. At 6th level, you learn that while these parts are helpful, they need to be worked on in order to avoid a malfunction. You gain the following benefit depending on which body part you chose at 3rd level. If you chose arm, you gain proficiency in leatherworks tools. In legs, you get proficiency in tinker's tools, and in torso, you get proficiency in smithing tools. In hindsight, I definitely would have changed this to where
instead of ask if that was arbitrary or if you.
I think I was thinking because I definitely had the design philosophy of this based off of Totem Barbarian.
Okay,
right?
yeah.
Which they even said, like, in the rework of 5th edition, they're like, we never intended for you to only choose one totem.
Yeah.
Like, you could re-choose each time. And in my head, I'm like, I have to have it be the same one. And so, like, you made that choice. You've already locked in. And so, like, this was kind of the way to make it to where, like, sure, the arms give you a lot of damage, but you're getting leather work tools versus the legs, which give you Tinker's tools, which is a lot better.
Yeah.
Right. I think reworking this, I probably would have said you get your choice of proficiency in one of these 3 tools.
Yeah. I think that's a good workaround for that.
At level 10, the metal connected to your body has made you immune to disease and poison.
I think it's a good one. That tracks. Yeah, I'm good with that.
Yeah, you've literally had that for like parts of you for so long.
I was a warforged, and I think I was immune to poison.
Yeah, that's the thing too, is like if other classes or races or stuff like that already have that ability locked in, being able to say like, it's already been is there a way they could have gotten this earlier? Okay. Then giving it to him at this point isn't bad. Is it weak? That's where you're going to have to think about. Yeah, there's a lot of things where it's like the barbarian at first level gets resistance to bludgeoning and piercing and slashing. So then add a 3rd level subclass for another class if they get resistance to that stuff. Is it as strong? No, because the barbarian got it at first level. Yeah. Right? That's kind of the thing you want to think about.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, but obviously you don't want to be doing that for every subclass because then it's not as interesting, right? Again, it goes back to the whole mechanics need to be unique.
Yeah, you got to diversify your subclasses because you want to make them interesting and you want to make them desirable to play too. Because there are times I've looked at characters, I'm like, I would never play this because it does not seem like it'd be a fun. I think it's where we come across with the cleric problem, the healer support characters because. I think people are doing a better job of it now, but like it's one of those things like it doesn't make it as interesting, so people are less likely to play cleric.
Well, that's why in 5th edition they bumped up the cleric.
Yeah,
but like it much like we're seeing in like Marvel Rivals, for example, where like the healers are such good at dealing damage, it's almost like why play a damage dealer if you can heal and deal damage. It's kind of like that with the cleric, where it's like it does such a good job at dealing damage. Maybe I don't want to heal that much.
I mean, I love the Jeff the Shark ability where you suck people in and launch them out. Yeah. It's great.
Yeah, definitely steal from video games too if you ever have ideas.
Yeah.
Yeah, people will love it for it. All right, final ability, because barbarians only get 4 abilities for their subclass.
Okay.
Keeping in mind, this was all in the old 5th edition. It's not necessarily reworked for this, so levels and all that stuff don't necessarily apply. 14th level, you are able to push your mechanical body parts to their limits for a short time. You gain the following benefit based on which part you chose at 3rd level. Arms. When you confirm a hit on a creature, you may choose to make that hit into a critical hit, thus getting all the benefits of a natural 20. This ability cannot stack on a nat 20 and can't be used again until you have completed a long rest. I don't want anyone double critting. So legs, on your turn, you're able to use the dash action as a free action without provoking attacks of opportunity. Okay. So a rogue ability of basically being able to, dash and get out of the way without people attacking you. Monks can also do that. And then finally, torso. When you are dealt damage, you can use your reaction to gain temporary hit points equal to your barbarian level plus your constitution modifier. Mind you, at this level, you're 14, and your constitution is probably at least a +3 or a +4, so you can gain 18 temporary hit points.
It's pretty good. Yeah, that's usually like depending on what you're fighting, like that's a couple of hits before you go down.
Yeah. So ultimately, this came about because I liked the idea of being able to have a auto crit when you wanted. And I was like, what would be a cool idea? It's almost like you're like super powering like your strike. And then like for whatever reason, the idea that popped into my head is your arms getting like those jet boosters.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
And that being what causes the auto crit intentionally. And so that's where like the idea of this subclass came from.
I think it's a pretty well thought about subclass for Barbarian. That's good.
Yeah, I would 100% change a lot of things. Number one, I think when you think of the fantasy of this idea of replacing your body parts with metal, you kind of want to eventually be a full metal being, right? Yeah. But at the same time, one could do a version where it's almost like choose your options, right? Yeah. You could have it be, you can modify your legs, arms, and torsos every time you level up. But when you do, you basically choose which part you modify. So maybe you modify your arms, and then you get that base ability. And then the next time you like at level 7, you can modify your legs instead, or you can keep your arms and make them better, right? That could be something that you do.
I like that. That's a good,
Now, the hard part with that is it doesn't really work in a system like 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons. Yeah. It would work great in a system like Pathfinder because every time you take a feat, you just choose a different version of that feat, and you can be like, okay, I'm going to double down on, my arms and increase it that way. So that would be a little bit difficult. I think for 5th edition, a way you could do it is at 3rd level, you increase your arms, right? Or you increase, like, your legs are the things that you replace, or your chest is what you replace. And then every level is a specific body part. And so at the end, you become fully, like...
Become Colossus.
Yeah. Or, whatever allegory you want to think of. Yeah. But that's the idea there. I think it's a interesting concept. And again, it shows you guys, like, your first few designs aren't necessarily always going to be interesting. They're not necessarily going to be super great and amazing off the rack. And most designers would tell you, like, it took them a few times before they had one that was actually pretty decent.
Yeah, and you just got to remember, again, playtesting is going to be key to those things, because if you're not playtesting it, you're really not going to know how great or bad or terrible your character is, your build is.
Yeah, so, like, let's quickly try to, like, homebrew a subclass together.
Yeah, sure.
Right? So do you have a concept of something? Think of a class and then, like, a fantasy archetype, or even just non-fantasy, right? Like with my Iron Fist archetype, I like the idea of having a pool of damage you could tap to at any point to do really cool stuff.
Here's what I love: the fighter class. My biggest issue is fighter. I feel like it's boring. I feel like there could be, so let's do a fighter.
Okay, so what if you can name a fighter from fantasy that you really like you would a show you've enjoyed, something that you're like, that is the coolest fighter I've ever had. Because, like, technically speaking, Sokka from Avatar: The Last Airbender, we would all classify as a fighter.
Oh, for
he doesn't cast spells. He uses a bunch of different weapons.
So, all right, how about this? One Punch Man from as a fighter.
You want to make Saitama into a subclass?
I do.
Yeah, we could probably do that. So what's the fantasy behind Saitama? He's the strongest, obviously, but we're in D&D land. You can't be the strongest out the gate. But, like, so let's keep going. What is it about Saitama?
Well, in order for him to get stronger, if I recall correctly, he works out. He does a lot of intense workout.
Right, but, like, he doesn't use any weapons.
No,
right? It's all his fist.
All his fist.
Right.
So unarmed combat.
Right. So we're going to be focusing on unarmed combat. And we don't really have a good unarmed combat subclass. Like, there are feats that you can take, like the Brawler feat, which increases the damage that your fists do. But they don't make them magical, right? So this is where we have to start thinking, right? Like, is there a way we can make this character already before we start making a subclass? And not really, right? Not really.
I mean, the closest I think you'd come to is maybe a monk.
Yeah, but even then, like, it's not the same thing of, like, being able to take hits and, like, walk them off, because monks are a little bit squishier. Yeah. So I think Saitama as, like, a fighter would be interesting. I think the first ability, you would need to make your punches magical. Yeah. Like, right out the gate, like, they go past resistance, or even just, like, they go past resistances, something like that. Yeah. To where, like, when you're fighting with your fists, you're dealing bludgeoning damage, but you need to be able to do more than that, right? Like, the wizard is going to be able to cast fireball eventually. Yeah. How are you going to keep up with that? Yeah. And so your fists need to be magical. So again, they kind of get rid of that whole thing in the new version, right? So if we're thinking about the new version of D&D, instead of having your fists be magical, or maybe they are magical, but they go through resistance. So you, like, anyone who has bludgeoning resistance, it doesn't affect you. Yeah. That could be a cool way to do it, right? You could have, so that could be like your default thing is you're always going to do damage. It's never going to be reduced. Yeah. Right. That's your third.
That's a real good one for Saitama, I think.
Right. And then other things we can start thinking about is, like, he's very durable. So we can think about, like, a reaction based ability where you just don't take any damage for, like, that attack. Yeah. Right. You just shrug it off because you're like, was that even a hit? Maybe that's what it's called.
Yeah. Okay. So it's like the Artificer's Flash of Genius. You could use it X amount of times depending on your proficiency level. Yeah, I would like something like that. Would be really
you
cool.
Can literally shrug off damage. Yeah, and that kind of fits a tank, which is what the fighter is. Like, you're able to hit the damage, and every so often you could be like, for that attack, I don't take any damage. Or because you want to balance things, right? Let's say the big bad is doing, like, a very big spell against you, and you just shrug it off. That kind of sucks if you're able to do that multiple times a day. So maybe instead it's you always make your save. Right, that could be a version. Like, you have Indomitable as a fighter. Maybe we could do something with that. Whenever you use your Indomitable die, you get an ability that like it allows you to then also on top of that do something additional. So then, like, what would be the final thing? I feel like it has to be the one punch, right?
Yeah, I mean, one punch, it has to be like you auto crit after then a long rest. Or
you can have the auto crit where it's like you auto crit and you do all your damage. Yeah. You could have it be the next hit you land is max damage. Okay, that could be an interesting thing. Like, literally, it's like instead of taking 4 attacks, you have one attack and that's it. And if you hit with that one attack, it does max damage. So then the whole point of your character is like, all right, let's load this sucker up. It's like,
that
I
would
got
work.
this spell and this thing and this attack and boom. And as I hit with my one punch, it just does max damage everything, which could be a really cool.
Yeah, that sounds. See, to me, again, if I was someone who's like, say, used to playing Barbarian, that would be like enticing. I'm like, oh, this guy's really strong. He's not squishy either.
So that's how kind of homebrewing works. That's how like you get your start into this hobby of design and figuring things out. You don't have to have like all this experience and being able to break down games really well. Honestly, just start with a system and like modify it a little bit and then a little bit more, so on and so forth, and then find a way to like get your subclasses out there, get your like designs out there so that people can give you feedback. Because let it be known, people on the internet will always give you feedback,
yes,
whether you want it or not.
Absolutely. Thank you.
So yeah, we appreciate you guys. Thank you for watching this, what we're assuming is going to at this point be a full episode of the What is Tabletop podcast. Make sure you check out Tales from Elsewhere and also Odin Keys Gaming. Both of them are great designers. We really enjoy their stuff. Obviously, we've play tested some of their things too, so it's really fun there. But check them out. Get Barbaric, I guess is their thing.
Hashtag
Get
Barbaric.
Did we fit in their theme? I think we fit in their theme, right? Yeah,
I think so. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. This counts. Yeah, they have to watch us now.
You have to watch us now.
Yeah.
They watch us anyway because they're awesome.
No, but now they have to live stream because like the whole point is that they're doing a bunch of videos, so they have to live.
Put us in your video.
Make them subscribe to us. Yeah.
You guys have already done a great job with that. We appreciate you.
Stay witty. Even though barbarians have low
Stay
wisdom.
ragey.
I think we'll end on that shot.